Around 170,000 people are reported missing in the UK every year, and in July of 1986, 25-year-old Suzy Lamplugh became one of them. Within 6 hours of her disappearance, she was reported missing, but just after a year of investigation with no leads, the police investigation will be closed. No crime scene or body were ever recovered, but in 1994 she will officially be declared dead. Who was Suzy Lamplugh, and can the actions before her disappearance point us in her direction and the direction of her killer? Detective Squad, give me a beat, give me a beat, give me an imaginary drum roll right now, right now. I'm watching you, I'm seeing you, not doing it. Start doing it. I need to blast this book on all fronts because David has made my week. Single-handedly could not drop this book down. Straight to the #1 spot. This book will be where 90% of the information, especially for part 1 of this case, is gonna be from. And it simply was just elevated to the #1 spot. And you know, I have read quite a few books because there's a whole playlist on this channel that is called True Crime Books. I know, very literally Slinda on me. But this book shares the #1 spot with another one that I have also been this excited about when I mentioned it on this channel, that I have used for the research of Lucy Blackman's case. That book is called People Who Eat Darkness. You know, while waiting for part 2, I would recommend watching that video, reading that book, and also investing your dollar, making David profit out of this freaking masterpiece. Because good writers make you fall for the characters, make you so invested. They make you not want to drop the book down because they intertwine the past and the present. They go and interview all of these people and then they're like, okay, this is what was going on in the 1980s. But the great writers, and why this book single-handedly goes to #1 spot on this freaking list, is because they make you also get invested in their own researchers. There are very slim chances that David, the book writer, and his researcher Caroline will come across this video, invest more than like 60 seconds into it, but never zero. Never zero. And if that is the case, Caroline, I want you on my team. So does everybody else. Promiscuous girl. Listen, it's that promiscuous girl in the background. Caroline, you and me, we can conquer the world. We can conquer. As soon as I profit out of this freaking channel, I'm still your girl, David. I'm still your researcher, that's it. That is it. Caroline was taking no shit. Caroline was the best freaking person, like beyond obviously David. She was like on the same level. And that's what I loved about it. It's like the dynamic duo. Like David wasn't treating her as the inferior. They were like on the same level doing this thing. And Caroline has cracked a lot of things in this case that I'm gonna be mentioning during this video, so props to you, Caroline. I love his researcher so much. Okay, now that I will calm down, go back to that screensaver and have a quick PSA before we dive straight into Suzy Lamplugh's case. There's no trigger warning for Suzy Lamplug's story per se, or trigger warnings as we usually have them for these stories, and that is because the first public service announcement before we dive into the case is that this case is still unsolved. Sometimes I have been told in the past I don't make that as upfront and as obvious as it should be. Like with the Girls of Panama, you lot have actually expected me to have that case solved, and I was like, I'm only the girl that can read what's on the internet and in the books, like. So from that point on, since that mistake, now I want to mention it up front. By the end of this deep dive, I'm pretty sure the case will still remain unsolved. So that's why my brain hurts, and that's why I need your Sherlock Holmes caps on to help me break these theories down and understand this case even better, because, you know, more minds are better than one. What is the saying? I'm an immigrant. Get me out of here. The second PSA here, and 99% of you who have followed this channel, who have been subscribed, understand why I cover these deep dives in a certain way. If you are new here, welcome. The way I do deep dives is that the first parter is usually focused on the victim, the background, their legacy, and also the events prior to the crime, and then we start off with the investigation, leave it off on the cliffhanger, and then all of the bad guys belong in part 2 and 3. And 99% of you have common sense and understand why I do the stories in such a way. Just think about how you would like your story to be told, how you would like your legacy to move on, and God forbid, touch wood, if anything was to happen to you, would you like somebody to tell your story in 5 minutes where they focus more on the person that has committed a crime? Or would you rather have, a whole hour or more just somebody talking about your own story, who you really were as a person? The third PSA, as my notes tell me that I should announce, this case is famous, okay? I'm the fake Brit. By that I mean I have the real passport, it's just that I wasn't born and raised in the UK. Have been here for a long time, and this case has been on my list of prospective cases for the longest time because I know how big this case was. And as such, people have strong opinions of it. A lot of people will probably finish this deep dive and still think that they know who Mr. Keeper is, still think that they know who the real criminal is, and that they are actually serving some time. That is really the consensus on this case, so I know that a lot of you are going to fight me on certain things that I say in this, that this case will be a lot more controversial probably than the other ones that I have for you. And that's why I read a book that was researched and then written between 2018 and 2021. So it was published last year by David, that uncovers, I would say, 90% of the information that isn't also available to the public so far. As in, it's not on Wikipedia page, it's not on most blogs online, unless they actually specifically mention that they have read the book. What that means, just because for the storytelling purposes I don't want to keep repeating that like 100 times in this part 1 especially, is that you only have access to probably 10% of the information. And based off of that 10% of the information that is available to you, if you haven't read the book and haven't listened to this part, you have probably made the theory, the supposition that the police has been driving so far. And that information just scratches the surface. And if you are here because the homegirl has read some books, that means we go far, far beyond that surface here. So there will be details where you will be like, I have never read this, I have never heard about this. And yet again, I keep saying, and I will probably not keep saying it as much in the storytelling part of this story, that is because it was unsurfaced 32 plus years later, beyond 2018. So those PSAs and the longest intro of all time out of the way, let me tell you the story of Suzy Lamplugh. And let us start off with her background. And in order to start off with Suzy's background, here we're going even deeper than that, because we have some information about her parents. In order to understand the household where Suzy would be brought up in, we need to go deeper into the background of her parents. In particular here, her dad Paul, because Paul Lamplugh actually believed that his ancestors were involved in the formation of Wesleyan Methodism. Wesleyan Methodism was a movement in the UK, I think still is the movement here, following its split from Church of England after the death of John Wesley. And Paul's middle name was Crosby, and for generations this middle name was passed down from father to son in order to honor Sarah Crosby. Sarah would be a revered Wesleyan Methodist preacher that was born in the 1700s, and a possible lover, mistress, had some sort of relationship with John Wesley himself. Paul's grandparents would also said to be found listed in the Methodist books. So he definitely believed that some part of his history had to do with Wesleyan Methodism, and he would apply these kind of practices at home. Now, when I'm talking about practices here, it's not so much that the household where Suzy would be brought up in was strict. It was more that it was strict in a particular way, where the teachings of this movement would be focusing on a perfect love. The teachings would preach that human sexuality is to be expressed only in a monogamous relationship between one man and one woman, following that framework of marriage and how that fits into God's plan, the celibacy, before you actually find the one. There's obviously a lot more when it comes to Wesleyan Methodism. This is the part that is prevalent to this story. Because, as I mentioned, there's no reports of like this household being super strict, I don't know, the kids like suffering, going for abuse, nothing like that whatsoever. It's more of the expectations that the parents would have had for all of their children, including Suzy, and it will matter later in the story as something that they might have disapproved of if Suzy was to have followed a different kind of lifestyle. Now, Paul and Diana married in 1958. They would be married for 53 years until Diana's death in 2011, and this marriage would result in them having 4 children. The two of them would meet in Cheltenham area, and Paul was aspiring solicitor, so he was already working in the legal field, and because of this job they would end up moving to London. Diana was working at the time in an admin role for the BBC, but she wouldn't hold that job for long. And she wouldn't hold it for long because at the age of 22, and only having been married to Paul for a couple of months, she would fall pregnant with the first child and the oldest of the siblings, Suzy's brother, Richard. By the year 1962, Diana would leave the job completely and she would just commit to these kids. She would at this point have 3 children, all under the age of 3. Richard was the oldest, then Suzy followed in 1961 and Tamsin in 1962. The youngest daughter, Lizzie, would be born in 1970, and at this point Diana wasn't just satisfied with being a housewife. She started a business with her friend that was called Slimnastics, promoting the workout program, and she would be heavily involved in starting different community fitness groups and helping write several books on health and well-being. Diana, by all accounts, was a great writer, and she did publish quite a few books, which will be the talent that Suzy would inherit from her mom. And in one of these books, she actually herself shared an anecdote that kind of gives you the insight of the household, and the insight of Diana being just the character. You know how, even from the interviews that I will play throughout this video, you can get the feeling of the family, like one of the spouses is usually the fiery one and the other one is like the calming force. Let's just say Diana was not a calming force in this marriage, and it's very, very apparent. She mentions this incident in her book where after a whole day of just being stuck in the house with 3 children under 5, Paul returned home from work and the two of them just started having like a marital row, like an argument. And this argument that day was about an onion soup. Like Paul said it was too salty, so Diana picked up a soup plate that was still full of that salty soup and smashed it over Paul's head, causing a cut that then resulted in a scar. Her fiery temperament would of course have some influence on Suzy and how she would behave. By the accounts from David's book, Suzy was a smoker, but she would never smoke in front of Diana or in front of Paul because that would be against the Wesleyan Methodism. If they were ever to meet a boyfriend of hers, a male friend, that person was expected to actually rise from the chair when Diana would enter the room. Suzy would have also had to instruct any of the boyfriends to remove any jewelry, like even ear piercings, before entering the parents' presence. And the book also mentions this incident where Diana was actually publicly known, and she had admitted to intentionally breaking up both of Suzy and Suzy's sister's first relationship with a guy, because she didn't approve of either of the boys that they were dating. Which means you have to wonder, was it easier for Suzy to just keep certain boyfriends private? Or to keep the relationship private until it was serious enough where she could explain all of these practices and how they were to behave in front of her mom and dad before actually introducing somebody to them. And that's just a bit on the family dynamic, but now let us focus on Suzy and what we know about her life. We don't actually know that much about her background. We know that she was born as Susanna Jane Lamplugh on the 3rd of May 1961. Her dad would describe Suzy as a very positive person, saying that she was jolly good fun, while her mom would remember Suzy would always tell her life is for the living. That's what it's all about.
She was a very positive person. She was very thoughtful and jolly good fun. I always remember one day Diana talking to her in her kitchen and chiding her for doing too much. And she answered straight away, "Come on, Mum, life's for living. That's what it's all about." And in a way, that's a lovely message which I like to be left with.
While Suzy was a child, while Suzy was still little, the family would move from a small flat where they lived to this East Sheen area, which is like a posh area in Richmond. I'd say it's a posh area in Richmond. I'd say any area in Richmond is posh, but you know, that's just me living in East London. No, tell them the full address, Mike. Tell them the full address. And Richard would say that out of all of the sisters that he had, that Suzy was the closest one to him. The whole family mentions Suzy to be a really outgoing person. If she was to set her eyes on anything, she was going to achieve it, no matter what. Suzy was always so energetic, so loving, so full of life. In all of the pictures that you see of her, she's just smiling. Literally, either in like a full diving, like windsurfing equipment, because she would participate in like so many freaking hobbies. That's why her mom would always say, you know, like Suzy's motto was life is for the living. So it will come as no surprise that in the beginning of the 1980s, she would actually be on board of this cruise ship called QE2. I only have two details about Suzy's time on this ship. One was that the people on this ship said that Suzy insisted to be called Susanna with an H, and her actual birth name was registered as Susanna without an H. So it kind of became an anecdote where the colleagues on this cruise ship just started calling her H. But at the time of her disappearance, she apparently changed that. She wasn't introducing herself in that way anymore, and she would just be known as Suzy, with different spellings ending in IE. The second bit of information that we have from Suzy's days on board of that ship was that she was keeping her diaries. So she was, by all accounts, an avid diary writer, personal diaries. Diana would say that Suzy was dyslexic, but still, regardless, was really talented. She probably expected her to one day follow in her footsteps. However, by all accounts, Suzy kept her writing, unlike Diana, only for her personal use. So on the board of this ship, she would keep the personal diaries that, from my understanding, were later, during the investigation, made public. Rather, the entries from those diaries would be made public, and according to David and according to the media, those were quote-unquote salacious. They were telling stories of her personal relationship and many partners. So you could see how Diana wouldn't want this exposed, you know, neither would probably Paul nor the rest of the family, considering the background and considering the strict monogamous relationship that they expected out of Suzy to follow through with. So Diana would say, once this was later exposed in the future, that there were no grey areas to Suzy. She was exactly what she seemed to be, and exactly how other parents would like their daughters to be. This will be something to keep in the back of your head as we go along, because keeping a personal diary was still very much what Suzy did at the time of her disappearance. And now you have to think about a couple of things here. Personal diaries in the 1980s would technically be a replacement for your mobile phones. I don't know, any PIN, any sort of code, anything that you would need in life, like beyond, you know, secrets, beyond things like addresses, literally anything would be in those diaries. And also, what you have to think in the context of the Lamplugh background is the information that she would keep in those diaries Suzy probably never intended to have in public, let alone read by her parents and her family. So whether it is because of the information that is referring to somebody else, whether it is the address, whether it is someone's personal details, or whether it is because of something that Suzy wanted to keep secret, you have to see it from an angle where somebody else might want to get hold of Suzy's diary in the future and might use certain techniques in order to lure her out, in order to get her somewhere where they can then obtain that diary off of her. From what we know in this story, Suzy is now still in her early 20s, and from this ship she starts working as a beautician at another cruise liner called Cunard's Luxury Cruise Liners. This would be the transatlantic route between Southampton and New York, and she would work there for 12 months prior to May of 1984. But the work was quite infrequent, and Suzy at this point was already 23 years old. She didn't have a regular paycheck and was still living off of her parents, so she just wanted to move on. She wanted to live her best life and move out of her place and find something on land. Her job situation would quickly pick up as well and would become more stable because she would start working as a beautician for different London hotels. And due to her grandmother leaving her some amount of money, she finally managed to move out to her own flat in Putney. But the situation obviously on a beautician salary with a lifestyle that Suzy was probably accustomed to wasn't still the best at this time. We're going to talk about the next flat move in a bit, but here I find interesting how Suzy's friends used to describe her, because obviously we'll hear one version of events from the Lamplughs and then a kind of different version of who Suzy was like socially. So there will be a variation of friends who would describe Suzy as somebody who would be prim and proper, conservative and also well-spoken, but also there would be people who would say that Suzy was no shrinking violet, that she would frequently swear, that she would use bad language, and that she would sometimes have outrageous and politically incorrect banter.
Well, she was a really outgoing girl. She just, at that time of her life, she'd been on the QE2 before, and she had a whole year. She went round the world on the QE2 and seen amazing parts of the world and had great experiences. And she was, I think, ready to settle down into London. And of course, London was booming at the time. There was a lot going on. And she decided that she should become a estate agent from being a beauty therapist. I remember her being very pretty. I've seen the photos, and she did, I assume, quite well as a beauty therapist on the QE2. Had some quite good gifts from clients, and so she decided to settle down and enjoy London life. And it was quite a busy time for her because there was a lot going on. I do remember quite a few parties and sort of times like that. I wasn't really part of the scene down there in Putney where she was living, and also Fulham.
Whichever way you want to see it, the impression that I have been left with after reading the whole book, after reading some articles as well online, is that Suzy was definitely more comfortable and more open with her bunch of friends rather than her family. That she was a chameleon of sorts. That her family might not have known every single part of Suzy. And I mention that because if you're familiar with this story, you will probably know of the next account of events. That happened in 1984, when Suzy was working for a place that was called Joan Price's Face Place. It was a beauty salon. Can we just please appreciate that there was a beauty salon? 80s were a different time. Everybody was high. You cannot convince me otherwise. There's a beauty salon. It's called Face Place. There's a literalist part in me that loves this. I know I'm focusing on all the wrong things. The right thing to focus on that happened in Jones Bryce's face place was that Suzy in 1984 was just, you know, speaking, attending to a client, right? Doing her eyebrows or whatever. I don't really know what she was really doing, but she was a beautician. She's just attending to this client, and she mentions that she is seeing a guy in Bristol. This would be a married man who was apparently 38 years old. Suzy never revealed the name of this man to the client, but the man would allegedly go home to the West Country at weekends, but during the week he would be living in a flat in London, another expensive flat, and sometimes would cook meals for Suzy at his apartment. This information would obviously be given to the police, but in 1986, already 2 years have passed, and the team would have double-checked the information on the cards, you know, it was all manual back then, but no links would be found to the West Country. Diana would, of course, discard this idea, saying that Suzy was too busy in order for her to have this relationship with a married man, which, of course, in context, no parent would want to admit something like this. But also, when the police later investigated, there wasn't really much there. This idea will appear with the whole businessman from Bristol theory that we are going to develop more on in part 2. I just wanted to mention it because it fits in the timeline here. Next in the timeline, what happens is that Suzy decides to change her jobs. And at first, and not just at first, this literally wasn't clarified for us up until one of the last chapters in this book. But if you think about where this story goes, Suzy obtaining an estate agent job, that is quite a switch from a beautician job. Like, it isn't obviously impossible, but you have to wonder, like, how? And for the most of this research, you're kind of left thinking, like, you know, that she just, I don't know, embarked onto this Sturgis and Son agency, that she just walked in and got her job. Nobody really could confirm, like, was she interviewed? Was there an ad? Like, how did this actually happen? And from her parents, obviously, you get the idea that Suzy was just born to do this. Like, whatever she was to put her hands on, she would do well, which is a typical trait of, like, strict households and how your parents talk about you. I swear, if I were to get, like, a finance job at, you know, Uber, my parents would be like, yeah, naturally. She was always great at math. I'd be like, cut that shit out, like I wasn't. 7 times 8. I have to think about it. 7 times 9. You know, like, you go from 7 times 10 and then you subtract. And that's the most complicated way. What I'm trying to get is that Suzy has changed her job. And finally, because of David's research, we have more details on how. There was an actual ad, and Suzy would get interviewed at Sturgis' Son, which would be her next place of work. Here we have one of the first names to remember for this partner, and that is the person named Keith, who was the partner at Sturgis' Son. He worked at a different branch, but that day he interviewed Susan. He was the person basically who was in charge of hiring and firing people, as he would say. And after she was employed, she was basically deployed to the Fulham branch, where she would be working day to day. And here we have a clear switch in dynamic. Suzy would, as we will speak about soon, move to a flat in Putney. She would move to this flat that would be like a 5 to 7 minutes ride at best from this office. So technically she could have walked to it, but she will end up having a company car. And this means that her whole life dynamic was also about to change, because she would also end up catching up with her family less and less, kind of like every week or on fortnightly basis. With this dynamic changing up and Suzy clearly living a completely different lifestyle that she would have lived as a beautician, there's also an introduction to another character. It would be Suzy's boyfriend, Adam. Now, I thought real hard here whether or not I should include this man's full name, whether or not I should be inputting any images of him, and I decided no on both fronts, because I really don't want this video removed. So that's why I will be mentioning only first names of everybody else in this story, so they don't come for my freaking ass. But a quick Google search would reveal both for you. And that is because Adam was never considered a suspect, so, you know, I don't want to have that on my back. But at the time of her disappearance, in 1986, she would have been dating this guy for only a few months. And this relationship was something. You let me know what you think about in the comments, but when I tell you it is gonna get super weird from this point on, boy, it so is. Adam, at the time, was 27 years old. He was a reinsurance broker, and he had known Suzy for about a year, but was only dating her for the few months. And now we don't really know much about him, as I mentioned, but we will have him tell the tale of the weekend before Suzy disappeared, mixed with other information from the book and online that I will be throwing upon you, shoving upon you right now. The short of it is Thursday, 24th of July 1986, Adam returns from his holiday. He went on his holiday by himself or with other people, not with Suzy, and the holidays was to Canary Islands. He had been away for a week. On Friday, or at some point during the weekend, Suzy's checkbook, personal diary, and a postcard go missing from her bag at a pub called Prince of Wales. And it just seems like they have fallen out of her bag at these picnic benches outside of the pub. Following that, on Monday, Suzy goes missing. Now, the long of it, and let us here start breaking down this day by day with the information that we know. On Thursday, the 24th, Suzy would get her hair cut and highlighted at the salon at the Fulham Road. We know how much she paid for it, so we definitely know that this had happened. She paid about £18.50 for it. And she did this, well, a lot of people say that she has, had her hair done because she was to attend a party on Saturday. So that might be why she fitted this appointment, basically while she was still having her work week in order to be ready for the weekend. I would like to spend some time on this hairdo and hairstyle change, and especially the change in hair color, because people don't online, and I think that this is layered, at least twofold. So one fold of this color change was that if I were to ask you, now even if you are familiar with the Suzy Lamplugh case, to describe the picture that you're most familiar with, you would probably describe Suzy as a brunette. Even me, even though I was familiar with this case, just by what was shown in the media, by what was circulated by most sources and most police outlets as well, would be the picture of Suzy as a brunette. And you know exactly probably the picture that I'm mentioning. It would be the picture that is on the screen now. And that is because of this recent change in her hair color. So there will be conflicting information in this book that David kind of dissects, where some sources would be mentioning that she would be light-haired, that she had recently changed her hair color. But when the major investigation room was set up at the Kensington police station, Suzy would have that picture. Suzy's brunette picture would be up with a description of hair, dark brown, shoulder length, highlighted. From the sources, this had happened because in the first 48 hours of the investigation, Diana was desperately trying to find any recent portrait pictures that she would have of Suzy, and she obviously didn't have any between Thursday and that party then that was going on Saturday, and then Monday, the day of her disappearance. So she didn't have any pictures of Suzy with her hair highlighted. I would actually say completely colored blonde, but a lot of sources just say that this was just, a highlighted kind of hair. So she just gave the police anything that she would have. Some of those pictures would be blurry, and then she contacted the friend of Suzy's, who then provided her with some pictures from the party. This isn't on Diana. Don't for a second think I'm blaming this on the parents. This isn't on Diana. This is on the police and what they're propagating in a case of a missing woman. And the fact that probably 90% of the people watching this who are familiar with this case remember Suzy Lamplugh as a brunette in my mind is an issue, and it means that probably more sources were showing her with a hair color that she had long time prior to her disappearing, which you can imagine how problematic this is within the first couple of days that are crucial in the case of any missing person. The second fold of the change in Suzy's hair color, and this is where I need women mostly to back me up in the comments, right? Because as it will become obvious when this investigation takes place, when we speak about it at the end of this video, and then later in part 2, men were running this investigation, and men would be describing her change of hair, whatever she had done in that salon, as just highlighted hair. And I'm just looking at this picture, I'm like, bro, she has changed the whole hair color. Why are we not seeing the same thing? What I have done to mine might at best be considered highlighted because it's simply like the money piece that has been changed. What Suzy has done is literally gone from brunette to blonde. That isn't the second fold of this. It is the psychology of it. I have read in one single line in this book that David had mentioned that Suzy was known for hairstyle changes. So from that, I kind of also, from the pictures that I have seen, do think that this is referring simply to hairstyles, as in the way she was styling the hair, where her roots would be put, the length of it, rather than the colors, because I haven't seen younger pictures of Suzy with like her hair in all of these different colors. I don't think she was known for changing the colors of her hair as often. And here I would do something that probably goes against all of the storytelling techniques, and that is to give you the spoiler on the theories in this case. So there is a theory that Suzy might have been stalked or like harassed by somebody. There would be a person, lurking around the estate agents, looking through the window, etc., etc., and that maybe this hair change, in that case, this part is coming from me, but let's say hypothetically that was the case, maybe she was changing her hair color in order to be simply harder to spot when it comes to that person who would just be lurking around and stalking her. Or maybe because we are gonna go a bit more into her relationship with Adam, she was to break it off. She was to leave that part of her life behind, and that is why the change happened. These, yes, are coming from my mind, and they might seem like a stretch to so many people. That's why I need women to back me up. But if she wasn't changing her hair constantly, yes, it could have just been like her wanting to look different at her friend's birthday party. Could be simply that, or could be something that relates to one or the other theory in the future. You get it. You go through a hair change when you're going through changes. It's just who is influencing these changes. Is it Suzy herself, or is it somebody else? Or is there nothing to it? I just haven't seen it mentioned anywhere. And that's the first thing that came to my mind when I read about these highlights and then have seen the picture of the actual hairstyle change. Now, from that long-winded topic, onto the items that actually went missing. And when did they go missing? I put in the script, remember the boyfriend of hers. So Friday evening, she would finally meet with Adam, who, as we know, returned from his holiday. They would go to the place called Mossop's Restaurant, which is apparently close to the pub Prince of Wales in Putney. And this is local area to Suzy, so Adam and her just would have a nice evening together, and at some point a few things appear to be missing from her bag. Now, this is the account from the first couple of months since Suzy's disappearance. So Adam, during those months, would say they went to the restaurant and then they went to the pub. But in 2018, or 19 now, I don't know, when David interviewed him, he completely denies that he was ever in Prince of Wales pub, that he had ever crossed foot in that pub. He says that's a myth. She never lost the items. Let me actually read you some parts of that interview that he had with David and Caroline. So they ask him about him going to the pub. He says he's sure that they never went there. So what about Suzy's checkbook stolen from her bag? He said never happened. That they never went to Prince of Wales pub. And then he snapped. and said, "You're never going to find her, and you're never going to find anything out." Is that one of the more ominous statements that you will ever hear in your lifetime? Yes, and I am inclined to believe it because I believe everything else that David has written in his book. But this will really be where we lose trail of Adam. And yet again, as I mentioned, I don't think that Adam was involved myself. I would have liked that we had further answers on how the police actually looked into him, how they eliminated him, etc. But something that I haven't heard throughout this story is any stories from Suzy's friends about him being abusive, about him being, I don't know, violent, anything like that, which usually precedes these type of events. So, I don't think that we should go on a goose chase and like wildly accuse Adam of things here. I think rather there's a different extreme here that I will mention later on, where Adam isn't as involved or as present in this relationship as maybe somebody would be in a normal, legitimate relationship. But Adam's statement here, minus the ominous line in the end, would actually match the eyewitness testimonies at the time. Because, again, spoiler alert, these items would never be picked up by Suzy. They would be given to the police and they would not be found in the purse. So it literally looked like either somebody had stolen them and then dropped them at the picnic tables, picnic benches in front of the pub, or that they have literally fallen out of her purse when she was there. But the initial eyewitness testimonies, from what I have seen, line up with Adam's initial testimonies, that they were there on Friday, and at a closing time on a Friday, these items would be found. Now, main reason why people believe that it might have been more like Sunday night is that we will learn that she really wanted to retrieve those items from the pub on Monday. She really wanted those items back. But before Monday comes, we have to talk about the rest of the weekend. So Saturday comes around and Suzy actually has to work. So she does like a morning shift. I think it was probably just a viewing or a few at Sturgis & Son, the estate agencies, and then she decides to go for her friend's birthday party. By all accounts, her shift would finish around lunchtime and then she would be picked up by her friend around 5 p.m. And this party would take place in Surrey, where her friend lived, and Adam wouldn't be invited. David smartly so mentions, despite the fact that he was just returned from his holiday, that they have apparently just had a date to catch up, and then that Suzy didn't really bother to make sure that he was actually included and invited to this party. According to the witness testimonies, during this party, Suzy would mention to her friends that she's actually due a large commission of around £3,000. And she mentions that she might spend that, the extra money, to buy a property in a joint deal with someone. But she doesn't mention their name, who she's planning to buy the property with. Apparently there are mentions that align with this, where Suzy also said that her 2-bedroom flat is on the market and that she has so far not managed to sell it to anybody else. Suzy slept over, she spent the night at her friend's house, and then from Surrey the next day she went to Sussex, to Worthing, in order to windsurf. And Adam joined them, so it was like a group of friends, they were just windsurfing and spent a day there. But people say even though, the day wasn't over, people were still hanging out, Suzy decided to just leave and go back to London. And this was around 5:30 p.m. Now, Adam stayed behind and there seems to be like a plan, kind of like just spoken in word, agreed upon, that they will meet later that evening. But they didn't. Instead, Suzy went to her parents' house. And this would obviously be the last time that her parents would see her before she disappeared. Her mom spoke of a birthday present, theater tickets, that Suzy gave her. Her birthday was actually the upcoming Wednesday. And she would just say, she was mentioning how Suzy is overloading herself. Like, why is she doing so many things? Like, we see all of these pictures in the family videos of Suzy swimming, windsurfing, she's constantly having a busy life. And her response to the mom was, as always, that life is for living.
Yeah, almost like a ghost behind me, really, holding me, and I always feel that that's probably what she is. A ghost. The last time I saw her was, in fact, just before my birthday. She'd given me a marvellous birthday present in a hotel and came to the theatre, and she wanted to know all about it, and we sat down and chatted and talked. She was doing such a lot of things, and she'd had a wonderful time windsurfing. You know, like all mothers, aren't you ever doing these things? And she said, no, Mum, life's for living.
There are legitimate reasons why Suzy might have gone to spend some time with her parents instead of actually spending it with Adam. And one of them, yes, would have been her mother's upcoming birthday, because actually she was working on that Wednesday. She couldn't take it off. Some policy, she probably didn't claim it in time with Sturgis and Son, the estate agency, so obviously she wanted to see her parents and her mom prior to her birthday. Another one that is mentioned often is that Suzy did have a washing machine at her place, but she just didn't like washing the laundry, which like relatable content. So she actually brought the whole load to her family's house to be washed. But later, after she left the parents' house at around 9 p.m., they believed that she was going to see Adam. So Diana wrote this open letter to her missing daughter, and I'm gonna read a part of it that was in the book. Diana said, I gather you went on to see Adam when you left us, and then went back to your flat where you spent a couple of hours just chatting to your flatmate, Nick. It sounded a friendly, fun end to a super weekend, and all was normal when you went back to work on Monday. By all accounts, by David's impeccable research, if I may add so, and Caroline's, never forget about Caroline, never, did you forget about Caroline? What have I told you? Caroline, you're gonna be on my team. How dare you forget about Caroline? Never in a million years. Put some respect to her name. Adam was last seen on that beach with Suzy. There was never another meetup. There would be a phone call at around 10:15 p.m. And according to initial sources, this phone call was just a general phone call, like a quick one to the boyfriend, arranging some other party that was to take place on a Tuesday. But the two of them wouldn't have met up. And here, before you send a guillotine to my house because I introduced a new character and you're all wondering who the hell is Nick, Maya, I just wanted to finalize the saga on Adam, because he doesn't really pop up in the future as much as probably we would want or expect us to learn about this relationship. I don't personally think that, as I mentioned, Adam had any involvement here. Would I like to know more answers to the basic questions of this relationship? Yes. But you have to think about this relationship in the context of Suzy's life and the way that she was living this modern life, right? Like, she was constantly busy. She has lived basically on a cruise liner, then moved to land, has switched her jobs, was completely independent. This was in the 80s, where, it's not like, okay, it's 1800s, and women didn't have, like, any rights, etc., but still, for the 80s, for her to move, from a strict household, live her life still independently, it is epic in a way, but also then you have to think about, could this relationship have been as modern as Suzy was for the time? And what I'm trying to say is, did Adam fit the projection that her parents had of who she was to date? And was Suzy smart enough, which I believe she was, to know that? What I'm driving at is, was this relationship just for show? Whether or not this was agreed upon between Suzy and Adam and was, a mutual consensus that they came about. Nobody mentions this, by the way, coming out of my head. Don't sue me for it or anything like that. Or whether maybe Adam, didn't know. Maybe this was the relationship that Suzy would have and wanted to end, as the rumors would insinuate. Maybe she wanted to get out of that relationship and see somebody else. And the basis for me saying this is that Suzy just seemed to be comfortable sharing anything when Adam wasn't around. and it just seemed like Adam was around, unfortunately for us, that weekend before her disappearance when her items have gone missing. And I also think here that the problem we have is that Adam was the boyfriend that Suzy's parents wanted her to have, negating everything else that didn't fit that narrative of who Suzy was with Adam, who Suzy was in this monogamous kind of relationship. But now, who is this new character, Nick, that I have introduced? To introduce Nick, we need to talk about Suzy's move to this flat in Putney. In 1983, just when Suzy was moving from her cruise liner job from the Queen Elizabeth II ship and coming ashore, her grandma passed away. She left Suzy some sum of money as inheritance and also a property on 49 Disraeli Road in Putney. Now, from what I understand, this property came with a mortgage. And this would be a large, three-story Victorian house that was built in the 1800s and was split between three separate flats. Suzy would occupy flat C, which would be on the very top floor, and it would be a two-bedroom flat. At the time, according to the accounts from David's book, Suzy was actually supposed to move in with her then boyfriend, but this boyfriend decided against living in London, and by all accounts, Suzy really wanted to stay there to find a better job, better prospects. So they, parted their ways, and Suzy went on to occupy this flat by herself. In order to pay for the bills, she would rent out the second bedroom. And at first, she would rent it out to this female friend, or I think it was like a friend of a friend, but this didn't go well. This girl kind of refused to pay rent or would forget to pay it a couple of times, leaving Suzy basically in debt. She had to pay off this mortgage. So she started putting out ads in order to look for another flatmate. And this would be when the advertising exec called Nick would come across Suzy from a mutual friend. And he was actually living in Putney area, but his rental agreement was coming to an end, so he was looking for a new flat to move into, and this came at the right time, so he would move in with Suzy. I will put this page from the book on the screen that was part of the interview with Nick. He would say he lived with Suzy for about a year. And during that time, it just didn't seem like Adam was there very often. I mean, the relationship, yes, only lasted for a few months before Suzy's disappearance, but Nick kind of doesn't really remember him coming. It sounded like he didn't really come ever, or Nick said much at all in the interview. Now, Adam, from all accounts, was part of the social crowd more. So people did see him in social events, like Suzy's friends met him through these gatherings that they would have usually on the weekends. And even the work crew, like people who she worked with, also remember knowing Adam. And Nick was aware that Suzy was in a relationship. Like, according to him, there was nothing ever between the two of them, as in Nick and Suzy. But he also gives an insight of Suzy receiving some flowers and odd phone calls. But from this interview, I gather that this didn't bother her, as in it wasn't a stalker, it wasn't unwanted attention, rather that she would feel neither ecstatic nor the opposite. Nothing out of the ordinary when she would receive one of these phone calls or the flowers to the Disraeli Road address. According to Nick, it didn't seem like these flowers were from Adam. He actually says that this didn't look like a serious relationship. It didn't look like he was the love of her life. And he finally puts this into words for us, saying that Adam was the kind of boy that her mother would have approved of. He was a nice, middle-class boy, good-looking, polite. He certainly wouldn't have been someone Diana disapproved of. Once David asked Nick about the Sunday night, unlike what fit into Diana's letter to Suzy, what fit into the first narrative that both Adam and Nick have stated, which was that there was a phone call at 10:15 p.m. and then Nick stayed up a couple of hours just chatting with Suzy platonically. This time around, in 2018, Nick doesn't remember chatting with Suzy at all on that Sunday evening. He doesn't actually remember seeing Suzy at all once she was supposedly returned to her flat after visiting her parents. Which, if true, you have to wonder, where did the 10:15 p.m. call come from? And if Adam wasn't with Suzy, and if Nick wasn't with Suzy, who was Suzy with? If Suzy was lying to her parents, if she was lying to her boyfriend and to the lodger in her flat, why? Why couldn't she confide in anybody? Because as you were to learn in the upcoming video, she also didn't really seem to entrust anybody else with any further information. So you have to wonder, either one of them, because of how memory works, doesn't really remember all of the events all of these years later and doesn't really remember that Suzy maybe was actually with them on the night of, or Suzy was really hiding something and she didn't want to share it with anybody, not a single person. But this brings us to the day of, the Monday of the 28th of July. According to the book, it was just a regular day at the house where Suzy and Nick lived at the Israeli Road. Apparently, in context, the nation was transfixed by the wedding, the royal wedding of Prince Andrew and Sarah Ferguson that happened the day before. What was the nation transfixed? If you are not a fake Brit, did you ever care about Prince Andrew before, his controversies? I'm not gonna make a video on it. Prince Andrew, don't even request it in the comments. No, I have watched the recent interview. I don't need this disgusting thing in my fucking life. Just looking at him makes me wanna vom. Well, in the Israeli Road household, Suzy was just drinking coffee out of her favorite mug. She was just listening to the radio. And then at 8 a.m., according to the news bulletin, the Queen and the Prime Minister had fallen out. Margaret Thatcher's policies were called uncaring, and Suzy was just finishing her coffee when Nick emerged out of his bedroom and he was also leaving for work. So the two of them just had a small talk. Suzy asked Nick if he left the ironing board up for her in the lounge, after which she had just ironed her chosen work clothes for the day that were believed to be a grey skirt, peach blouse, and this dark blazer. She dressed up, locked her flat door, and left for work in a company car. I'll put it on the map. As I mentioned, this is at most like a 7-minute drive to her offices at Sturgis and Son. Suzy parked her car, white Ford Fiesta, on the side street just close to her agency that is now Chesterton. Is Chesterton's also a state agency? Basically, the agency back then closed up. It was called Sturgis and Son. And she just went in. By all accounts, it was supposed to be a busy Monday morning because of the viewings that were happening that weekend, so they were supposed to close a couple of deals. And here, Suzy's seat would be in the window, so basically just like closest to the door. There is a psychology behind this. I think it is as simple as estate agencies being constantly these creepily open places where everything is in glass, because probably then you see them there, right? You see these estate agents, you know that they're there and you want to spend money because people are working. I don't know, what is the psychology of it? Does anybody know like the exact psychology of it? Because in my opinion, it's probably that you're more inclined to go in and spend your money on all of these things that you see in these windows if you see them in. It's creepy though. Regardless, it's creepy. I'm very surprised there are no more like stalker cases when it comes to estate agents. Don't get any ideas though. Do not. I just am pointing out how creepy this fucking thing is. So she goes in and she sits at her desk that should have been just opposite the main door. Now, the office was usually staffed with 3 negotiators, out of which Suzy would have fallen under that role, an office junior, and a secretary. But that morning they were really understaffed. So one of the negotiators, called David, was on holiday, and Suzy's boss at some point during the day would have gotten out for lunch with Keith. Remember Keith? Told you to remember him. He's the guy that hired Suzy, so would have been the boss of a boss. So that would have left pretty empty-ish office. It would have been Suzy Nigel, one other negotiator, and the office admin, the secretary called Stephanie. Before people come at me in the comments here, yet again, if you don't listen to intros, which honestly sometimes I don't blame you, they're too fucking long, this is mostly from the book. So this information about the dynamics in the office and what was going on in the office, you can't really find anywhere online. I'm pretty sure of it. Definitely not on like a Wikipedia page or even the videos on YouTube. So just so you know, I'm not like pulling this out of my ass. I'm not inventing this information. I think it's very relevant to the case, and it just was never investigated by the police, as in the police never actually inquired about the dynamics of the office that day, and both David and me think that it's very prevalent to the decisions that Suzy might have made on that day. Before I give you the details on the office drama and break this down, let's summarize the short of it, the information that is actually mostly available online. If you know of this case, you know that around 12:40 p.m., so around lunchtime, Suzy would have left the office. She would have taken her house and her car keys and a purse with about 15 pounds in it and some credit cards, but she would leave her handbag behind. She left the office because, according to her diary entry, at 12:45 she was to meet a supposed buyer called Mr. Kipper. This would have been at the location 37 Shorrolds Road, just about a mile from the office, simple 3 minutes car ride from where she was at. But she never returned. And then at 6:45 p.m., her manager would finally report her disappearance to the police because she was supposed to have another viewing at 6 p.m. and the client called because she never showed up. Now for the long of it, and for that you need to understand the dynamics that were happening in the office and at the pub that same morning. So the first couple of things that are kind of like BAU, business as usual, not business as usual, but they're just details that don't fit anywhere. Missing items. According to the book, nobody really remembers Suzy being stressed about the missing checkbook, personal diary, postcard, literally all of the items in the bag, mostly checkbook and personal diary. According to the admin, according to the secretary, Stephanie, she's the only one that kind of vaguely remembers Suzy might have mentioned the missing checkbook, and maybe there was a possible call from Suzy to the bank to cancel that checkbook. Suzy's colleagues apparently knew about Adam. They would meet him when they would go for team drinks at the bar that would be nearby called Crocodile Tears. And this bar will come into question a bit later in the day. But for now, so the dynamic is that Suzy isn't as stressed as people would expect her to be if she really wanted to retrieve these items with urgency that morning, which will be one of the theories. That would be, a supposition later. So rather, she sits down at her desk, and by all accounts, it was a really busy morning and they were extremely understaffed. And then, as she's sitting across the other negotiator called Nigel, an argument ensues between the two of them. By all accounts, Mark, the manager, was actually there, but he was kind of just like sitting in the back of the room, so he doesn't actually remember this argument at all. But the argument was about who had a better bidder, basically who had a higher offer. And literally it was just the two of them kind of going at it because in this office, Mark was the one making the decisions. So the negotiators would come with the offers, and then Mark would act as a king, according to the book. He would be the branch manager, and he would be the one deciding which offer to accept. And of course, the offers, you would suppose, would come with a commission. Maybe the commission that Suzy was speaking about at that party on Saturday. This argument doesn't really lead anywhere. Mark doesn't remember it. He doesn't remember making any decision on that day. And at that point, south of the River Thames, in Putney, in the Prince of Wales pub, there is a stock take, an inventory check going on. There are at least 5 people in this pub at that time. The full-time landlords are there, but they're getting ready to leave because one of the landlord's sisters had a baby, so basically they're going out to visit a newborn baby. They're not expected to work on that day. The stock taker is currently doing the inventory, he's listing everything that is on the pub premises, counting the money, in order to hand over the pub to two relief workers called Clive and Karen. Clive will be a crucial part of this story because in the interview with David, he will remember working at the pub on a Sunday, and he will remember that this is when the missing items would be retrieved. So the checkbook, the secret pocket diary, and that postcard are on the premises as of this moment. This was the weirdest pronunciation of the word postcard. Moving on. According to Clive, he found them as he was going out to pick Chinese takeaway for his dinner the night before. So he just brought them in, and that day, again, because these interviews happened like 32 plus years later, Clive remembers vaguely possibly calling the bank in order to find out who the checkbook belonged to, and that is probably how he got Suzy's details. And then, at some point during that morning, he would ring Suzy to tell her, hey, we found your missing items, and Suzy would get that call, supposedly in the office. The story of the items going missing on a Sunday makes sense now. To me, at least. It flows better than if she was to have these items going missing or just dropping them out of the bag on a Friday, because it matches Adam's story, it matches Clive's new version of events. Adam's story being that he didn't know where she was on Sunday, or basically he thought she was at home, and that also he never stepped foot into this pub. Then Clive's story, associating with another like Chinese takeaway, there's more details there. It seems like he actually does remember picking up these items and finding them on a Sunday night. And it would make more sense like for Suzy to then like have the urgency to actually pick these items up on that day, on a Monday, rather than her, not canceling her checkbook or thinking about this and coming into this place to pick them up at some point on a Saturday or a Sunday, because the pub would have been open on any of those days. But it also matches everybody's account where nobody really knew where Suzy was on a Sunday night when she made that call to Adam. Before going out for lunch and supposedly during one of the phone calls with Clive from the pub, something that nobody will remember is exactly when Suzy would say that she is going to come and pick up those items. But the idea was that this was supposed to happen on that day. However, Suzy already had a diary entry at the time. The only diary entry, BTW, that we will know is legitimate. She had it for 6 p.m. with a woman called Joanna. So we had the address, it's Waldemar Road, and it's not really near the pub area. And from all of the sources online, it is stated that Suzy was very punctual. So the supposition here is that probably she wouldn't be picking up these items at 6 p.m. right as she's to have this appointment with Joanna, like so many initial reports would say that she would, and that maybe during the lunchtime this would be her sort of time to escape, to skedaddle out of the office and use this time in order to pick those items and then just quickly return. Now here, if you don't buy into this theory, because this isn't the main theory that people obsess with, this is kind of like the alternative pathway of like the items went missing and there was some urgency to collect them on the day, you probably also don't really understand why she would have to urgently collect any of those items. And that isn't really clear. Like the checkbooks worked kind of like the credit cards, I would assume, as in you could ring up the bank and cancel your checkbook and then nobody can use it, even if you have probably signed a few checks and they could technically enter the amount. And the personal diary, well, for her to want to pick it up this urgently, it would mean that it contained information that she didn't want anybody to read. Most of the people online don't think that the checkbook would have been what Suzy actually wanted to collect with urgency, rather that it's probably whatever was in that personal diary. Now, going back into the office, again, nobody really remembers the exact times of this. There are versions of the events online where Clive might have called the bank and then the bank might have called with Suzy, but in the book, Clive apparently remembers talking to Suzy directly. But let's say at some point during the morning, she had the argument with Nigel about the bid, and then she also found out where her items were and arranged to pick them up at some point during the day. Now, come lunchtime, the policy in the Sturgis and Son at the time, by all accounts, I would say, was kind of lax. It was relaxed, as in Mark wasn't really, I don't know, pulling the strings, like making sure that people go at lunch at the exact times, and also because of how we will learn this disappearance was reported, I would say it was pretty relaxed. So sometimes two people would go on the lunch to have lunch together. The important thing was for a fee earner, basically negotiator, somebody above an admin role, to always be in the office. With the office being understaffed on that day, this would require either Suzy or Nigel to stay behind. Why? Because Mark was about to have lunch with Keith, the boss of the boss. So in terms of the dynamics, Keith usually wasn't at that branch, but he was visiting that day, so it is for us to suppose that he probably saw Suzy and everybody who was there, came before lunch and then went to have lunch with Mark. And Keith was obviously the person that gave Suzy her job, and she wouldn't have known if he was to return from his lunch break, if he was to go back into the office. So the two of them are out for lunch. This leaves Suzy, Stephanie, and Nigel around the office, and Stephanie has left. She's like, listen, I have different, I need to eat, I need to go have that Tesco meal deal, or whatever. The Tesco existed for a while. Tesco is here. Tesco has been around. Tesco meal deals? Not sure. Somebody will let me know in the comments. Why would she? It's in Fulham. There's no probably even no Tesco. Where are you going with this? Stephanie goes out to have lunch. She was probably like in a posh-ass restaurant, Maya, for all you know. You don't know what she was eating on that day. I'm nosy, I wanna know. She's out, leaving Suzy and Nigel inside of the office. Both of them are fee earners, meaning one of them had to stay behind. Now, on to the core of the office drama, Nigel and Stephanie were dating at the time. And even though nobody remembers, maybe Nigel wanted to go out to have lunch with his girlfriend, leaving Suzy in quite a predicament. A fee earner had to be left in the office at all times, including lunchtime, unless they had an appointment, unless there was a work-related task. Work-related task in Suzy's line of work would of course mean a property viewing. So let's say she is at this moment in time sitting in front of her diary. Possibly, we have no idea at what points any of these free diary entries that we are going to talk about were entered, but we are to suppose the 6 p.m. one was probably already there, the Joanna one at Waldemar Road, and that one was out of all free confirmed to be genuine. So she's sitting in her little cubicle at her desk, let's not call it cubicle, Maya, it's probably not, right next to that window. What is in the window usually of the estate agents? It is the lineup of all of these properties that they're selling. And 37 Shorrolls Road, the address, was the property that Sturgis's son was behind. They were advertising that property. It only came into the market a couple of weeks before Suzy's disappearance. And it would have been right there at the side of her desk while she's probably just doing her daily tasks. At the side of her eye, the corner of her eye, she sees that property. So if there is any urgency for Suzy to leave that place, at that point, she's probably looking at her diary thinking, well, Nigel is already gone or is about to go have his lunch with Stephanie. I'm going to be left here alone and I need to get out. And the only way for me to get out is to fake a diary entry, as if I were to have a viewing at 37 Shorrolls Road at 12:45 p.m. with Mr. Keeper. Let us speak about those 3 diary entries, out of which the general public will focus on one, and one only, because Joanna's one will be confirmed to be legitimate, so of course there's no reason for us to dwell, double L in the end, no dwell, that does not exist as a word. There's no reason for us to dwell on that last diary entry. However, the first diary entry is very much a miss. I will look deeper into that for part 2, but so far this is just kind of like a forgotten diary entry that only has one connection when it comes to research, and it literally only is mentioned in David's book. And the entry is 4142 Wardour Avenue. And it's not even just that. I'll put it on the screen, but it seems like Suzy tried to scribble something else, and then maybe she was scribbling it the wrong way or something, so she just erased it out with her pen and then noted down 142 Wardour Avenue bike contract. This I find to be interesting for a couple of reasons. One is that everybody ignores it, and later when we talk about how Suzy's car was found, Wardour Avenue would be the closest stop out of anything connected to Suzy's case where that car was. Bike contract, why? What? Suzy wasn't a known cyclist from what I have read. She wasn't in this business. Why would she have put any entry of such, any entry of this sort, and why did nobody really look into it? Then we have the now infamous 1245 Mr. Keeper appointment at 37 Shorrells Road, which is where everybody thinks that Suzy is at this moment in time, because her work diary will be left inside of that office. So according to people who think that this entry is legitimate, that Suzy is now to do a property viewing, and that this was probably in her diary for God knows when, Suzy would have logically jumped into her car, her office car. The car that Sturgis's son would provide to their employees wouldn't have any inscription, you know how certain cab companies, estate agents companies would usually have it like blasted on the car. It would rather be a regular vehicle. They would share the end of the license plates, because of course they all can't be the same, but the license plates for most Sturgis and Son cars would have the last number of the plate be GAN, and that would be crucial later in the investigation. So we are to suppose that Suzy entered into her car provided by her company, probably, logically, would have taken the keys to the property, Shorrells Road, that she is just going to, and would have just driven for about 3 minutes. This place was literally down the road. So this would have taken her literally 3 minutes for her to make it to this appointment at 12:45. One thing that I forgot to mention when it comes to the Mr. Keeper entry, the OS next to Shorrells Road means outside property. So people who believe in the Mr. Keeper theory that something happened to Suzy as she was out lunching, and then obviously having that viewing that would have supposedly been followed by a lunch, something happened to Suzy during that viewing at Shorrells Road, and then whoever did her harm, whoever Mr. Keeper was, they would have probably driven her car to this random location that we might learn wasn't so random after all, and then would have had a secondary vehicle, would have disappeared from the scene with Suzy's body. Because if you remember from the intro, Suzy's body to this day has never been found. Now, in the alternative view, let us have a hypothesis that Mr. Keeper entry was bogus. That she just literally was sitting there, was thinking like, hey, we have this 37 Shorrells Road on the market, I need to get out for whatever urgent reason that she had to get out of that office for, and she's just thinking, what do I put? Why Mr. Keeper? Why put that name? Here I put myself in Suzy's shoes. I would be like, okay, if I were to have to get out of the office to run an errand, don't want to get in trouble, want it to seem legitimate, don't want anybody to figure out that I have gone out of that office, what name would I put in? It probably wouldn't be something obvious like Mr. Smith, like that probably like 80% of the population. Don't quote me on numbers, please. Please don't quote me on stats. But you know, it wouldn't be something where the last name is so common. So why Kipper? I have looked into like the etymology, you know, like the family name, all of that stuff, to see if there's anything connected to maybe Wesleyan Methodism, connected to anything like that, where she would have had it like in the back of her head on the ready. And there isn't much, at least from what I have seen. And also, there's nothing in Suzy's background where that would have been a logical thought process, like etymology, thinking about names, and thinking about, I don't know, the history of last names and why that would have fit into this narrative. There is one narrative, though, that sort of might have fit here that the book offers. In early 80s, Suzy lived with her sister Tamsin in Walham Grove, which is literally, again, just a few minutes from Shorrells Road. During this time, she would meet other people, because we know she was super outgoing, so in those local places she would meet other people from the community. During this time, she would meet two brothers that went by the last name of Herring. And Kipper, if you do a simple Google search, is herring. It is in particular the whole herring, like a really fat one, is split in a butterfly fashion from tail to head that can then be gutted, salted or pickled, and is usually the food apart from cod that you eat as like fish and chips. This part is a definite spoiler to the investigation, but the person was tracked down by David, person named John Herring, and he said that nobody called him Mr. Kipper, and he lived in Shorrells Road when Suzy went missing and then moved out to Wardour Avenue. And this is the only connection between those two places. And Suzy supposedly didn't know that. And the Wardour Avenue address where he moved to wouldn't have been the same address. It would have been like much higher or upper from the road. The person lived at number 20, and the address that Suzy put in the diary was 142. Still, apparently this person was discarded and was also like questioned and was known during the initial police investigation, and nothing connects him to Suzy. Do I think that it's weird? Can coincidences happen? Sure. I think it's more like where the association came from if we are saying that Mr. Kipper is a bogus entry in that diary. What I find creepy is when you Google the word Kipper and when you actually look into the origin of the words, you find that it is a similar word in all these different languages. And in Icelandic, the word means to pull or snatch, and in Danish it means to snatch or to seize somebody. And thinking about what might have happened to Suzy on that day, I don't know, I just find it so sinister that this is the word and that nobody really knows how she came across it, if this is the bogus entry, or if it's not, who this person might have actually been to this day, like all of these years later. So, if I haven't lost you yet, if you want to actually explore this other theory, Suzy, was apparently desperate to leave the office for whatever reason. Maybe she wanted to run a different errand. And this information literally came because of Caroline, okay? So we wouldn't have known these little bits of information if it hadn't been for Caroline. This is why, Caroline, you and me, you're on my team. They know. I will never stop praising you. So, Caroline, I think this is actually 2021. I think this is literally like COVID era, 2020. Caroline is just going through everything that David and her had researched on. She's going through all of the articles, going through like all of the radio entries, like re-listening to all of the tapes, all of the broadcasts from the time. And she comes across Diana's interview. And during this radio broadcast, Diana says Suzy had been windsurfing and she was in very good form, and she was looking forward to going out with Adam on Tuesday. This fits the whole narrative where we know that, they might have had that phone call about whatever they were to do on Tuesday after work. And playing tennis on Monday. And there was absolutely no reason, there was no indication, and she's not sort of person. And this is where David stops Caroline and stops that recording, takes it out of his ears, and he was like, tennis? On Monday. Suzy was supposed to be somewhere else on Monday. And here he works his way around because he is the ex-detective. I think he's retired now. Yeah, he is much smarter than all of us, right? So he figures out that there is, because this is still July, so it's summer here in the UK, so if she was to have played tennis that day, it would have to be after work. It wouldn't be during lunchtime. So this would have probably happened in like Clapham Court or like anywhere close by that would have the open tennis court. And for that, if Suzy, because nobody mentions that she brought like any equipment, the gear, the tennis racket, anything like that, but David had noted down that she did have a tennis racket at home. So even though this didn't seem to be something she would do frequently, and there would be nobody to support this account of events, and tennis is not really a one-person sport or activity, and this is the part that pains me, there is a possibility that she had some plans that she then shared with Diana during that weekend to play tennis on Monday after work. So we have some sort of leeway now to understand better. Maybe it's not even the urgency, maybe it's just trying to fit everything into the schedule. So during the lunchtime, she maybe wanted to go to the pub to pick up all of the items, then continue with her day, have the 6 p.m. appointment, and then immediately go to play tennis. That would also mean during the lunchtime maybe she wanted to go home because she lived close by. She was in the company car. It would be like, what, 7-minute drive? Go home, pick the tennis racket or anything that she had forgotten, and then fit that tennis match, because by the accounts, because she disappeared on that day, we actually know that the twilight on that evening was at 8:55. So she wouldn't be able to basically fit everything after work. She wouldn't be able to go to the pub, collect everything, go home for the tennis racket. She wouldn't have enough daylight to play tennis on an open tennis court. As I mentioned, this is a plausibility, like it is definitely an information that they have recovered, and it kind of offers you an insight of like why maybe there is a different theory that can exist here, or why she wanted to actually leave her office place with urgency on that day. But here there's nobody who like volunteered, raised their hand up, be like, I was the person that was supposed to play tennis with her after 6 p.m. appointment with Joanna. Like there's nobody there, and I don't think she mentioned it to her family, and it's just so many pain points where you think like, why? Why didn't she mention? Was it because it wasn't Adam? Was it because it was again somebody that she was hiding from everybody? And another pain point is that she would never make it to the pub. Or rather, maybe she did make it to the pub if this is the plausible theory. Maybe she did make it to the pub, but never managed to collect all of those items. Because the items would not be found later in Suzy's car. Rather, they would be given to the police by the people that were working at the pub. And here in our timeline, we have another event that comes from Clive. So again, I'm gonna put, because some of you are gonna be like, this is fake, this is weird, what is this, Maya? And I do admit that this is strange. But according to Clive, and then David, who interviewed him, around 2 p.m., he received a phone call. In his chat with David, Clive would talk about how he found these missing items basically underneath the bench, that it literally looked like they were just dropped from somebody's bag. And then that he phoned up the bank the next morning because there was no phone number in the checkbook or the diary. So he inserted diary into the conversation, meaning that he probably remembers that diary was retrieved as well. Then Clive remembers getting a phone call on Monday about 2 o'clock from a woman saying, if she comes, tell her you can't find them and give us a ring. The phone call said, try to keep her there while I get round there. And apparently the person on the other end of the line said Susan. And she didn't say Miss Lamplugh or whatever, like using her real name. So he thought, and what he told the police apparently at the time, was that maybe this was Diana, maybe this was a family member that wanted them to speak to Susan about something. But he has no idea who this person, apparently woman, was who phoned the pub at around 2 p.m. on the day of Suzy's disappearance. Because I have just thrown like about 1,000 details at you, let's have a quick recap of this day so far. Suzy knows that her two bosses are about to have lunch together, that Keith is there and she doesn't know if he is planning to come back to the office. She might or might not have had a conversation with somebody in the office, maybe Mark, where she said that she needs to go out during lunchtime. They all know that she might be missing some items and they might be thinking, well, she's logically going to go collect those. If she has the appointment at 6 p.m. with Joanna for Baltimore Road, and then if she's planning to play tennis after that, this is the only time where she can actually go to the pub on that day to retrieve those items. Around midday, Mark and Keith go to have their lunch, and at the pub there is the stock take that is taking place, and Clive and Karen are there. Around noon, Mark and Keith go to have their lunch at the place that's called Crocodile Tears Wine Bar, and at the Prince of Wales pub, well, Clive and Karen are just doing their stock take. Once Keith is gone, Suzy decides to go to this pub at the pretenses of showing a property to somebody named Mr. Kipper. According to people in the office, at 12:40, so just a minute before she was to be out the door, she actually might have had a phone call with somebody. And here the idea is that this was Clive or somebody in the pub, and maybe they don't remember it, just as and when this conversation happened, but it was just for her to confirm, somebody will be there to hand her over the items. In the work diary that she is to leave behind, she puts Mr. Kipper in order to justify why she, as a fee earner, as the person who is supposed to be at this office, or well, somebody of the negotiators is at all times, now suddenly needs to get out, just in case if Keith comes back from lunch and basically inquires where the hell she is. But she maybe not have taken all of the steps in order to ensure this. Meaning, if you are showing the property, if you are actually having a legitimate appointment at 12:45, you would then bring along the keys to that property, to 37 Shorrold Road. And I'm here to tell you that there is a great chance that Suzy didn't do that. What is my basis for making that argument? Well, in this book, David goes on a whole hunt and examines all the pictures of the forensics, examines all the pictures of the police investigators at Shorrold Road, which will only happen a day after Suzy's disappearance, PTW. So once that happens, and in those pictures, he doesn't see any sort of intrusion to the door of the place. He doesn't see that maybe the locks have been changed and then, the keys would obviously have to change. He doesn't see that they had to break into them. He doesn't see any damage to the door, which means the only logical conclusion then would be that Suzy left the keys to the property behind in the agency. You don't need me to spell it out, but that would mean that she wasn't going to show a property to anybody. In our timeline though, before we pick up on the whole keys saga and the beginnings of the investigation, Suzy is now gone and everybody expects her, right, to come back from lunch, and then at 6 p.m. she's gonna go off and show this other property at Baltimore Road to the client named Joanna. But she doesn't return. She doesn't return from lunch, and it's only at around 4 p.m. that alarm bells kind of start going off in people's heads. And to me, that says that yes, maybe the atmosphere in this place was a lot more relaxed than we would think, but also to me, and just in general, the feeling I got reading this book is that this could have been a pattern of sorts. We all have that person at work who is either late because they're driving, they're stuck in traffic, they're just late, or that they go and have a bit more of, lunchtime than other people do. And it's kind of common, and it doesn't seem alarming to anybody because they might have done it before. And that's kind of the energy I got from reading this book, that Susan might have taken, some of her lunchtime to do errands, to go shopping, to Putney. Maybe Mark suggests like she might have gone home, like her home was close enough. Maybe she was picking up the racket, maybe she was doing something else, maybe she was having a shower. For all we know, everything here is in a close proximity. So even if she was to have had this viewing, she might have just gone out to run an errand. And then, only at 4 o'clock, kind of, people were like, okay, she's still not back, is she coming in? Is she going to come back before the 6 p.m. appointment? So at 4, the first call was made to her parents. And this call further supports the belief that Mark kind of doesn't spell out, but everybody thinks like she might be out running for an errand, is that there's no mention of this viewing that she was supposed to have had at 12:45 to the parents. They speak with Diana and they don't mention this viewing at all. Diana would say herself in the documentaries that she would get this call, she remembers it vividly, and she said that Mark, apparently, or whoever called her from the agency, asked her, does she have any idea where her daughter might be?
The office in Fulham had phoned to say that Suzy hadn't come back after lunch, and they didn't know where she was. Was she perhaps at home? Well, of course she wasn't at home.
Apparently they said they were wondering if she could have called into home for lunch, but then when they said no, they were like, okay, nothing to worry about. According to Mark's interview with David, he thought Suzy might have gone to have some lunch and then maybe do some shopping in Putney. And this is why they phoned the friends first, the family, then the hospitals. And the last person that they called after the whole day of just Suzy not returning and them having checked in everywhere was her mother. Because they might have suspected that the diary entry was false from the very beginning. Finally, after Suzy didn't go for her appointment with Diana, that they knew was genuine and the client probably called in or maybe came across the agency herself, at 6:45 p.m. Suzy's boss Mark would call the police. They would alert them that their employee, Suzy Lamplugh, is missing, and most of the police was already somehow off. There were only 2 detectives manning the Fulham Criminal Investigation Office between 2 and 10 p.m. These would be Mick Jones and Steve Hill, who would be put on that case straight away. As soon as she was reported missing, they took down the registration number of Suzy's car and they started circulating it among other officers in the area. And it just happened that 9 hours after her disappearance, at around 10 p.m., Suzy's car would be found. Parked, unlocked, with the driver's seat pushed all the way back and abandoned on the side of Stevenage Road, which was not far from Fulham Football Club. I'll put on the screen exactly where this car was found, so if you are looking at the Fulham Broadway area, that's where the agency is, that's where the Charles Road is, and that's to your right. And the car was found on the very left on this map, where the pin is, and the only address that is familiar to us in this case, that would be close to where this car was, would be Wardour Avenue. Inside of her white Ford Fiesta, the police will find Suzy's purse with her bank card and £15 inside. And the keys to the car, to the company car, were missing. By this point, the police would have already kept in touch with the family, telling them what they were doing, and they also tried to reach out to Adam, to Suzy's boyfriend, but he wasn't at home. As one police officer has just come across this car and they're trying to deploy forensics to see if they will retrieve anything out of it, which, spoiler alert, they won't. There will be no fingerprints, meaning, from what I understood, no Suzy's fingerprints as well, which is suspicious. It probably means somebody did wipe some fingerprints, used gloves, maybe premeditated this to begin with. As that is happening, on the other end of town, well, rather where her family is, they actually decide to go in and break into Suzy's flat. What they don't do that evening will be go to the location where Suzy was supposed to have the viewing, 37 Shorrold's Road. They will not break into that location, by all accounts, and by all accounts they will go into that location the next day, once they were probably given permission, and more importantly, given keys to the property by Sturgis and Son, by the estate agency. Because if the locks have not been broken, if nobody broke into this flat, that means that Suzy left these keys behind. And nobody's really spelling it out, but the fact that the police didn't go to the location, the fact that Mark might have probably realized that the keys were there to begin with, they usually didn't have duplicate keys for the properties, and even if they did, they would be on the same keychain. The fact that nobody's spelling it out probably means nobody really thought that this diary entry was legitimate from the get-go. Either that, or this is really shitty partial police work, because it's good that they broke into Suzy's flat to realize that she's not there, that nobody did her harm there, you know, that she didn't use her lunch break to go there, but then at the same time nobody really investigated the location where she is supposedly to have her property viewing. And in the other end, if you believe into the theory, the Mr. Keeper theory, that she was there during lunch, you should also be pissed about this, because it means that that person, whoever it is, had the whole day ahead, had at least a couple of hours ahead to do whatever they wanted to do at the Shorrold's Road location. Back to the car. We know that the seat was pushed all the way back, and Suzy, from what I have read, was about 5'6" tall, so she definitely wouldn't need to push that driver's seat all the way back. We know that there were no fingerprints found in the car, but the location of the car might have been a clue that the police probably missed, let's be honest, from the get-go. And that clue came with another eyewitness called Wendy. So back in the day, I'm just going to quickly summarize this because there's a lot in the book on Wendy. Back on 28th of July, so that morning, Wendy was on the way to the bank and she saw this car that she had never seen before, just parked across from her location. Now, her account of events isn't the most reliable in a way, because she would say that she had seen this car much earlier than 12:30, and then the workmen in the area, so like scaffolders and stuff, would say that they have seen it at a different time, and this would have meant that that same exact car was there before Suzy was to even leave her office for lunch. What came out of the actual location being across Wendy's house was that Wendy's house was up for sale with Sturgis and Son, and what was missing out of Suzy's car was the car keys. Now, the car keys, by most accounts, would have actually been branded, would have been marked in terms of a keychain. They would have the Sturgis and Son keychain. So whoever and at whatever point did something to Suzy and then decided to dispose of her car, they could have easily checked the car keys, realized, okay, this person is an estate agent, she's working for Sturgis and Son. The way I stole this investigation is to ensure that I just park this car wherever I see the board that is in front of somebody's house that says on sale by Sturgis and Son. To end the saga on Wendy, Wendy was credible in a way where she gave them the partial license plates. So she definitely remembered the GAN. And then when David looked into it and Caroline did her research, They found out that there were 313 similar vehicles with the plates ending in GAN. There were other press releases that would be at the time where people would start speculating maybe she did have a second viewing, maybe there was a viewing at Stevenage Road, maybe it was at Wendy's address that has never been confirmed, or Suzy just didn't put it in her diary. But those I wouldn't really give much credence to, because Wendy would have confirmed if she was the person that was supposed to have the viewing with Suzy that day. That would have probably been the first thing coming out of her mouth. But also there's just no grounds for us to believe that there was this viewing. I'm just going back to Suzy being competitive, wanting that commission, like her having that whole argument that morning about the bid, wanting to be chosen to actually get this commission for whatever property. That could have been twofold again. Maybe she was hiding where she was going. Maybe that is what we are missing out, the missing piece of information, where after that argument she didn't want to share what viewing she had on the day with Nigel, with Mark, with whomever, because maybe she wanted to have, to one-up Nigel, to have something so that even if this falls through, she has something to fall on. So maybe that is the part that we are missing and just nobody really talks about it. But from what I've read, there's just no credence to Stevenage Road ever being where she was supposed to be on that day. The very next morning, once the news of the royal wedding have subsided, Nick Carter, the detective superintendent, was given this case at around 7 a.m. The London Evening Standard already ran the story that was headlined "Kidnap Fears for Estate Agent's Girl," and it just seemed like somebody leaked most of the details to the story to the public. This, in turn, meant that press conferences had to be organized on the day in order to put the word out. These press conferences would include, obviously, Paul and Diana, and also Adam, for most of them, her boyfriend. Once the police found him the night before, he actually was questioned by the detectives for most of the evening where Suzy went missing. During those press conferences, the family and Adam would say that they had a witness who says that they have seen a fair-haired lady and this man leaving the property at about 1:10. And that is the last time that she had been seen. They state what she was wearing: the grey skirt, a peach-colored blouse, and a dark jacket. And they basically end the conference saying that they're appealing to everybody. Did you see her? Did you see this man? And did you see the white Ford Fiesta? The whole family really reiterated the idea here that Suzy would have not done this, that she would not have gone on her own accord. Adam would say that he is hoping against hope that she will turn up unharmed in some remote spot, and Paul said that none of them can understand what has happened, but that she must have been taken away against her will, kind of just sounding off on what Diana would say in all of these statements. Diana also provided an alternative theory in those initial broadcasts that they would have about Suzy, saying that maybe she doesn't know what happened to her. Like, let's say she had been kidnapped and then just abandoned. Maybe, that kidnapping involved her being hit on the head or just knocked off. And that's why she might just be wandering around in a daze. It's just so heartbreaking that people, especially her family members, are just thinking about all of these theories. And it's so much more heartbreaking and sinister, like my skin is crawling, that still to this day, this is something that might still be in people's head, just speculations, because nobody really knows what had happened to Suzy on that day. That same day, so not even 24 hours since Suzy went missing, the police will be seen forensicating 37 Charles Road. And here, just yet again, the questions that could have been picked up on, the mysteries that could have been resolved at the time, was where did they get the keys to open up this place? If only that had been noted down and answered back then, we wouldn't be in this predicament. If somebody just noted this down, be like, okay, this person from the agency gave me the keys, or I don't know, how else? Maybe the property was unlocked, and then we have another rabbit hole to go down to, thinking like, well, why was the property unlocked in the first place? Or maybe there was a lock change that we are just not aware of. But according to the book and the pictures that David had seen, they have been forensicating this place sort of early in the morning on the day after Suzy had disappeared. And at this point, during the first couple of days, some outlets are saying that she is fair-haired, some still are circulating the picture of Suzy as a brunette, but there are no real leads coming up. That all changed on Diana's birthday. Diana's 50th birthday on the Wednesday of the 2nd of August. As you can imagine, Suzy's poor mom did not really spend this day celebrating. She was most of the day attempting to get as much press coverage as possible, doing interviews for TV, for radio, holding a press conference in the garden of her home, just appealing to people as much as possible. And by this point, the police would have released an artist impression of a man that they believed to be a mysterious Mr. Kipper. This sketch would be created because a neighbor of 37 Shorrells Road called Harry Riglin would give the police a description of a man. So according to this first legitimate witness testimony and the number one testimony BTW that anybody will focus this investigation on, Mr. Harry Riglin was just looking out of his window around this time, like 12:45, 12:50, when he saw a man. The man was about 5'8" or 5'9", immaculately dressed, shirt and tie. And get this, when the police asks him what stood out to you, like why do you remember this random man when you were just peeking out of the window, like what sparked this interest? Well, he said the man had a bottle of champagne on him, and that is why he remembers this very random interaction that he saw outside of the house.
Saw Suzy in Shorrells Road that lunchtime with a mysterious Mr. Kipper.
So he said she was with a man, or a man was nearby, and he was a very smartly dressed public schoolboy type, was the words he used. But the other significant thing was he said he was holding a bottle of champagne.
If you are picking up something from possibly the recordings that I'm putting in, if copyright allows it, Harry Riglin is picking up a lot of details about this man. He remembers him carrying a champagne bottle, he remembers, how this man was dressed, but he's not really giving much insight into Suzy. He will say that there was a woman with a man, that she was light-haired, but really, he never identified Suzy. He would give a sketch on the man, and yes, that makes sense in retrospect, but also it would have made a lot of sense for him to be able to describe the woman in as much detail. And the reason why Harry might have focused on this man, how he looked like, what he was dressed like, compared to his limited description of Suzy, was that Harry Riglin was gay. And nobody really inquired of it at the time, nobody really asked any of those questions, and nobody really asked probably more pertinent questions to the investigation, and that is, what did Suzy look like? What was she wearing? Because we know what she was wearing. Certain things that could have been picked up on the spot that could have then told the police maybe this wasn't Suzy. Maybe, yes, he did see this random-ass interaction, and maybe the person that he saw wasn't Suzy Lamplugh. In the next couple of days, her family just continued doing as many media appearances as possible. Diana would express her fears about Suzy possibly being kidnapped and shut up somewhere, and that she must be held against her will because she's fit, she's strong, and capable to cope with most situations. And also Paul, her dad, would kind of reveal other bits of information that might be helpful to the public, and that was that Suzy actually had claustrophobia. Well, rather, he said she suffered from fear of being in a closed space, and that she had once panicked in a cable car. Then this must mean that if she was actually kidnapped and held somewhere, that she will be terrified. They got so much support, like so many letters from so many people, because they try to humanize Suzy as much as possible and for people to see this side of her, and that made other people also relate to this story and kind of like engage in the investigation, which led to a lot of sightings that I will be putting up on the screen just so we don't have to spend so much time going through them. Some of them would be more reliable than others, like there would be a sighting by her friend on that day that would kind of match the timeline, and she would also have recognized the car. And then again, there would be sightings which would lead nowhere and would come 2 weeks into the disappearance, and you have to wonder, well, why? Why wouldn't some of these people come forward much earlier? David investigated a couple of them as well, and he kind of points out to the same things. There was one sighting as well that came from a person that gave police alias, and you have to wonder, well, why? Why? And you know, a lot of them don't even match the time, they don't match the car, they don't match the person, they don't match the circumstances. So a lot of people did come forward because of the press, and there was a ton of clues that had to be kept on cards, on manual cards, because it was still 1980s. But again, the question about that is how many clues there were actually reliable. Once the police didn't have anything beyond this sketch circulating the public for the first 7 days, out of desperation and the lack of clues, a reconstruction of possible events would be made. It is prevalent for me to emphasize that both David and me believe that this is why was this done. It's just 80s were a different time, but this is a fictional representation of the events that nobody really for sure knows happened. But of course, when something like this happens and you have a visual reconstruction, visual representation, then it gets stuck into your head. And then from this point on, this is what people will see. This is how people will see the events of that day happening. I would very much be interested for people in the comments to let me know if they have seen the initial reconstruction or just even the coverage on Crime Watch. I know this case was covered heavily by literally anybody at the time. Like, which one have you seen? And again, do certain scenes stick out in your head once you have seen them, and then this is how you remember this case. This is what you think had happened. This reconstruction, and as mentioned, that's just from the book, so I haven't found this particular thing online. The only documentary that I have found, I will be playing clips from, so you can see that one on YouTube as well. But the reconstruction begins with a very blonde Suzy, so hey, at least they got that part right, sitting in an office holding a receiver of her phone and just putting things down in her work diary. The reconstruction then continues with Suzy taking the key from the board of the rear of the estate agency, which is kind of doubtful whether or not that had happened, as I mentioned throughout this story, and then getting out, getting into her car, getting to this property for sale on Shorrolds Road. A suspicious-looking man in a dark suit is awaiting for Suzy for this viewing, and this character of Mr. Kipper, they're all played by different police officers. The character that is playing Mr. Kipper walks Suzy into the property, and then she follows him in, removing the key from the lock of the front door. The two of them from this reenactment then get out, and they are just seen kind of looking at this property. And then, with Suzy's look-alike driving, the two stand-ins just abandon Suzy's white Ford Fiesta in Stevenage Road. So, I don't know, according to this reenactment, it sounds like Suzy was the one that then got into the car, abandoned it for whatever reason in Stevenage Road, and that's when whatever happened to her actually happened to her? Or does it just mean that she got out of the car and vanished into the thin air, disappeared, the aliens abducted her? I don't know, but that part at the house, at the actual property location, then sticks in people's heads, doesn't it? The truth was that the police had drawn the blank. They have just ran out of all of the credible witnesses. And David and Caroline attribute this to how the investigation was actually going in those first crucial couple of days. One thing would be, yes, align the hair color, maybe of the person that you are searching. Second would be maybe ask the right questions, maybe wonder how are you entering this location that, you know, she was supposedly to have a property viewing at, if she was the person that is missing and is supposed to have the keys to this very property. Like, do you have a duplicate key? Did the agency give you a key? How do you have the key to this property? And also, David mentions it looked busy. It looked like the police was busy, but a lot of things that they were doing weren't really crucial for the criminal investigation. Like, they would organize uniform officers to go out with dogs, search open spaces, towpaths, even maybe organize some divers to go into the Thames because, you know, maybe she was going home and then something happened and somebody disposed of her body in the river. But nobody was really asking the right questions. From the keys to exactly noting down when they collected these items from the pub. Nobody looked into that theory. Was she having something else on the agenda that day? Whether it was tennis, whether it was another reason why she had to collect those items from that pub. But they would recover the pocket diary, the postcard, and the checkbook from Prince of Wales in Putney. We'll speak about the pub route in more detail in part 2, but just like with the police 30 plus years later, nobody really remembers how these items were handed over. Like, David interviewed Clive, he interviewed other relief workers, and there's a lot of things that is kind of fitting in the pub theory, like it was going through reconstruction, you know, there was the stock take that day, so it wasn't like regular workers of the pub, but a lot of things that should have been clarified by, you know, police annotations, like noting down everything, just like we have when they called that car in, just like we know when exactly the call was made to report Suzy missing, noting certain things down that would have clarified a lot of things. Like, there's so many details in this story that should not be a mystery. Something that annoyed the living shit out of me when I was reading this, not because of David's or Caroline's fault, just BTW, it is, you know, the use of language that is so common in, like, mostly actually Spanish back home, in Serbian as well, where you don't put the subject, right? You're like, you're not saying, oh, I picked the items up. No, you're like, the items were handed over. I'm like, this is not a dissertation for university. Just own up to your shit and tell us when and where. Or the person had disappeared. No, they didn't. They don't disseparate. This isn't Hogwarts. This isn't some, like, fucking thing where she can be at two places in the same time and use these Hermione Granger's, what's that thing called? Time turner. This isn't Hogwarts. This shit isn't magical. The person doesn't vanish into the thin air. Like, use present tense and own up to the mistakes that have been made. Somebody. Just clarify certain things. Or if they're not mistakes, then give us the exact timings if we have them logged. What this would mean for the family, the way that they were investigating this case, the way that not right questions were asked, and that they appear to be busy. We'll talk about in more details in part 2 all of the reasons why the investigation might not have been the best investigation out there, let's just say that, would mean that the driving forces of the investigation had to be Lamplughs themselves. For what reason? In particular, Diana. Like, every single person that David had spoken with, they were like, oh yeah, we know Diana. Like, we either met her personally, she had either been to our house, Wendy, for example, where the car was found. She would say, like, Diana would bring a medium to the house. So many people were like, oh yeah, no, Diana drove this narrative. And that's the problem, because A, it's the problem why the police isn't doing the work, why does the family have to do all of the work? And then the other problem that we have is that the family is desperate. They're desperate enough to either buy into any theory that the police is going to put forward, or B, do anything to get any further information, because their daughter is missing. And for all they know, they have to tell themselves certain things to sleep at night. They have to tell themselves that their daughter is alive and just being held somewhere, which isn't the outcome. None of it is the outcome that anybody wants. One of the things in this timeline, I'm so heated, I'm so pissed off, and it will not stop in part 2. But one of the things in this timeline that possibly could have yet again contributed, when you really think about it and see a bigger picture to why this investigation was shit, was happened at Christmas of 1986, when Nick Carter, who was initially put to investigate Suzy's case, retired. So the case was just handed over to like a whole different investigative team, which yes could have the positive sides, but no, because police seem to have just lost control of their case. So, end of 1986 and beginning of 1987, Detective Superintendent Malcolm Hackett steps into Carter's shoes. And he would gain this investigation where there was no beginning, no end, no real clues. And again, with the pressure of the Lamplugh still putting on him, because for now it's already been a couple of months that this investigation was taking place. It's already been a couple of months that Suzy still is missing and nobody has a single freaking clue. And this transition might have actually been a crucial moment, because the parents that were so desperate by this point, yes, possibly wanted to move on with the knowledge of what actually happened to their daughter. But also that desire to then move on, to end the pain, to have all of the clues, to understand and have an explanation of their daughter actually not just vanishing into the thin air on that day in July of 1986, might have become strong enough to have the potential to create the opposite of what everybody so desperately wanted, and that was the potential for a miscarriage of justice. With the investigation now entering its 13th month, in August of 1987, Malcolm Hackett still had to admit that he wasn't any closer to finding out what happened to Suzy. Because the Lamplughs hired legal representation from the beginning of this investigation, the case would sort of not have any clues, but it would remain active. But that changed in October of 1987, when the Lamplugh investigation would end up being closed. But then less than a week from closing Suzy's case, something will happen. In Leamington Spa area, on Thursday, 29th of October 1987, which is my birthday, but I wasn't born for 5 other years, a 33-year-old man would end up being arrested. He was arrested for an attempted robbery in Leamington Spa. And when they searched this man's car, they would find a briefcase. And inside of this briefcase would be a disc belonging to a victim's car. This victim's name was Shirley Banks. Once they searched the suspect's car now, they would find Shirley Banks's car in his garage. He repainted it and he put false number plates on this car. So now they had a clear connection between their suspect and the victim. And of course, this would lead to this person being arrested. Police in Bristol would arrest this man, and this arrest made it to the news. So now, looking at this mugshot, looking at his picture, a lot of people in London, and by people I mean press, started comparing it to the only sketch that they had in Suzy Lamplug's case. The media started suggesting that this person's pictures looked a lot like the artist's impression of Mr. Keeper. And at this point, the Lamplugh family had already founded Lamplugh Trust. And with the help of the legal advisor, Diana would make direct contact with Deputy Assistant Commissioner called Paul Condon on 1st of November 1987. So she waited nothing. She read this in the media and she waited not a single second. She informed this commissioner of the arrest of the man in Bristol and asked him to reopen the investigation into Suzy's disappearance on this basis. This commissioner apparently didn't reopen the case, but he advised for a couple of police officers to go to Bristol, to basically speak with the officers there and see if there were any clues between this man and Suzy, the way that they were between him and Shirley. And the officers will find that this man, who was just behind bars, was previously convicted of rape. And he has been placed on a rehabilitative day release from Wormwood Scrubs which is in London, in Hammersmith, at the time of Suzy's disappearance. This would mean that at the time of Suzy's disappearance, this man was based in London. He was planted on rehabilitative day release from Wormwood Scrubs in Hammersmith, while Suzy would be getting up each morning to go sell her properties at the estate agency. This man would be leaving his prison hospital to work as a part-timer at this theatrical proper company. His co-workers, unaware of this man serving time for rape, would say that he had a talent chatting with women. He supposedly had access to cars before getting caught and while getting out of that hospital during the day. And this man would have been released from this prison hospital the Friday of Suzy's disappearance. And that is where we will be picking up in part 2 to talk about Mr. Kipper, the potential Mr. Kipper, the theory that so many people think is the correct answer to Suzy's disappearance. We'll be talking further about the police investigation, pinpointing little bits and pieces to further explain why it went the way it did and talk about where it stands now. And then we will be kind of talking about the theories in the classic timeline. Classic or what? Classic or what? Just, you know, the main theories, breaking it down, sort of which one flows better, deciding again and again which one makes a better flow, which one sounds like it must have more potential, and also talk about what the police would need to do, where this would need to go. It is the opinion of a man much smarter than me, and his investigator, his researcher, much smarter than me. It's not like coming out of my head, but he does propose a solution, and I think it is plausible to a certain degree, or where this case can go from now, or at least for it to go to alleviate certain things, for us to make sure that this isn't a plausible option and then move on and maybe find what a plausible option is. Because I think this case can be solved. I truly hope it can be, otherwise my brain is gonna remain hurting for the rest of my life. I can't believe this case still isn't solved, and I can't believe that even though I have read a book, I have, you know, and I'm doing this deep dive, still some basic questions that just will remain unanswered. It just makes no sense to me. It just makes no sense that the first questions that you would think when listening to this video of asking whoever was involved in this case, whichever party, just weren't answered, and you're like, what the actual fuck? Cool. Something tells me this video is long. I don't know, it might be that I have been sitting on my fat ass for 4 hours. And the external noises are bothering me. But, as always, I want to know what your theories are in the comments. And as always, thank you for watching. I don't say that enough. You really could be doing something else with about like 2 hours each week. You really could be doing something else. So I appreciate that instead of doing whatever, or maybe while doing my multitasking, what is wrong with this chair? While multitasking, scrubbing your toilets and, you know, cleaning your baths and stuff. That's what you think people do while listening to your voice. Great, great. I am the entertainment for the bath cleaners. You spend 2 hours, more or less, give or take, each week with me. I need a new chair. This is not insane. I don't need a new chair. I need to be lighter as a person. One of those things will happen next week. What is in this chair? I'm gonna lose my fucking shit. Thank you for watching it. Make sure, if you know somebody else who is crazy about Suzy's case, as crazy as you and I are, to share this, or just to share any other case on this channel. Make sure you get them to like and subscribe, and I will be seeing you next week. I have still to work on part 2, okay? Don't expect it like tomorrow. More like a week from now, okay? Okay? Bear with me. Bear with me. I want to do it right. Bear with me, okay? Now it's not beep. What's wrong with this chair? You don't care about the chair. Goodbye now. I am off to edit it and then to start researching and scripting part 2, because some of the research has already been done. David, buy this book. Buy David's book and put some respect to Caroline's name. I will not repeat it twice. Caroline, call me. Bye now, guys. Bye.